everyone. My name is Frances Byrne. I'm at the School of Babs at UNSW. And I really started with the TCRN a few years ago, and in particular last year when I applied for my first NHMRC grant, and obviously all the other cancer associated grants that you can apply for through that stream. So I pitched my grant to the TCRN Consumer Advisory Panel, and there I met a whole host of consumers who were really fantastic, really gave me good feedback on how to describe my research in lay terms, and also provided just some good questions, and even some really tough scientific questions that I think are important for the community to hear about. And so our research primarily focuses on metabolic, either cancer metabolism or looking at the links between obesity and specific types of cancer. And so I met two consumers on that advisory panel. One was Mary Potter, who I don't think is involved in the panel anymore, but she was really great because I think she was an endometrial cancer survivor, and that's one of the cancers that I work on. And then really I met Jeff, and even though, I guess the reason for his passion about colorectal cancer is due to his poor wife passing away from that a few years ago. And but I was able to speak to Jeff about my research projects and the different projects that are going on in our lab, and he seemed genuinely excited and interested in our research. And so I guess today I'll talk to you, or we'll both talk to you a little bit about a unique relationship that we've developed with Jeff in our lab, because we knew that Jeff is really passionate about cancer research. He's involved in a lot of different scientific boards, and has also formed collaborations and networks with people at different universities across Australia, including WeHi in Melbourne. So what we began with is initially just speaking to Jeff about our research, but that kind of developed into a more kind of integrative, hands-on approach for Jeff, because he was really passionate. He wasn't happy with just sitting back and just letting us do the research. He wanted to get in there and get his hands dirty. So, in a unique situation that we have is that Jeff actually has started doing some research in our lab. And so he's actually testing some of the molecules and the drug discovery projects that we're working on to try and see how these molecules affect colorectal cancer, because previously we hadn't really focused on this cancer at all. And so now with Jeff's help, we are actually testing some of our novel molecules on colorectal cancer cell lines in collaboration with some people at WeHi. So now I'll talk to you a little bit about Jeff can talk to you about his relationship with our lab, but mainly I really want to say this, that the communication is quite strong, obviously, because Jeff is actually coming into our lab frequently to kind of do these experiments, and obviously we have built up and developed a good relationship there.
Thanks guys. It's great to be here, and my name's Jeff, has been mentioned. And what I thought I'd do is just give you a little bit of background as to, I guess, Frances has mentioned some of this, but the reason why I'm standing here today. As Frances mentioned, I lost Cheryl, my wife, to colon cancer 4 years ago. And so I had a passion to do something to try and find an answer, obviously in relation to colorectal cancer. So I went around the country speaking to a lot of research facilities and finished up at Walter and Eliza, as been mentioned. And, I had the benefit of joining a group down there working on colorectal cancer, headed by Professor Burgess, Tony Burgess. And I'm on a panel down there, a steering committee where he's looking at different aspects of colon cancer, including an organoid project. I'm a member also of the AGITG. I've been working on a working party that's been reviewing the current clinical guidelines for colorectal cancer, a similar one now on colonoscopy, and a member of the AGITG. So more recently I joined the TCRN group, and it was there that I got the opportunity to meet Frances and Kyle. When that opportunity arose for me to do something other than support the work in the way that I was, obviously it was something that was well, it amazed me, to be quite frank, but it's really good being in the lab and actually being able to do something. And through that collaboration that Francis mentioned, Professor Burgess in Melbourne is talking with Professor Hohen here, and he advised and helped organise some of the cancer lines, which we've got 3 that we're working on, LIM 2405, 1899 and 1215. So they're the focus that we've been working on over the last 2.5 months. We've been able to produce a very nice dose response curve and a pooled one that's looking very good for the lab molecule. And we're at the stage now of saying, what should we do? Some combination therapy. So we're looking at combining that molecule with some of the standard chemotherapy drugs that are about, such as 5-FU and oxaliplatin, and also looking at some inhibitors, and we're thinking about the BCL2 inhibitor. So it's been a tremendous journey for me to actually be in that position. But I think as a general thing for someone working in the consumer role, I don't think you need necessarily get right into the depth of it, but I think you really need to be passionate about linking to a cancer type that means something to you. Because I think that you do need a bit of passion there, and whether that's a connection to a loved one or a disease state that you have yourself, I think it's very important, where possible, to be able to link your connection to research that way. I think also that the communication is very important, and I think having regular communication is essential. And come to that meeting with questions, even if it's for your own clarity. But I don't think I've met a researcher that hasn't liked having questions asked to them. And I've often said, I hope this is not a dumb question, and I think most of them have said, there's no dumb questions in this, and they're very happy to ask. In fact, are thrilled that you're asking questions about their research. So I'd really emphasise that as part of the component of being a researcher, to think about what their research is and the application in the world, and be aware of that. That regular communication can be in all sorts of forms. It might be just getting on the phone and saying, how's the research going? Can we meet for a cup of coffee? And we did that in the uni grounds a number of times, where I asked some of those lame questions. But I think that's what you've got to do, and you've got to be prepared to do that. Review meetings, I think, I got the opportunity of actually going into the lab. So quite early in our relationship, there was an opportunity to see hands-on what was happening and why it was happening, and the difficulties in getting a result. So, of course, part of our role is promoting the success rate of getting an outcome. And I think when you can see it a bit from the other side of the table, and some of the difficulties that are there in getting a result that can go to a grant and ultimately to better outcomes for patients with cancers, that's a really big thing. Having said that, I think part of that role is you need to be very aware of a day in the life of a researcher, because it varies and it can be very stressful. So I think it's important for us to remember that there are times for a researcher that can be difficult for that phone call, and that might be in the early part of the year, January to March, where a lot of researchers sitting down doing grants. It may not be a good time then to be looking for time with a researcher. Similarly, if you've got a clinical researcher, a day in their life might be with a patient where there has been a difficult outcome. They may have lost a patient. So there's all sorts of involvements there that I think the consumer role needs to be aware of, so that we can not only have the contact, but we can maximise the value, which I think will in turn promote more contact, because we're both doing it from the right point of view and understanding the role of the other person. And obviously, as been mentioned, grants, and bringing the grant to, if you like, a social level where we're making sure that the equity and all those sorts of things are in grants, and it's in a language that has been mentioned, needs to be both scientific and non-scientific. Thank you.
Jeff's level of consumer involvement is going above and beyond the call of duty, but we don't expect that to be all researchers to involve us in their actual laboratories. So now I'll call on Sue McCulloch and Dr. Eva Battaglini to talk about their research and their consumer involvement.
Good afternoon. I'm Eva Battaglini and I'm a research coordinator for the InFocus study, which is a program of research into chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. So I've been working with Sue and another consumer advisor, Phil Mendoza-Jones, since I came on board with this program. Just before I talk about Sue's involvement, I might give a little bit of an overview of what we do. So chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy is a side effect of commonly used cancer treatments. It basically involves a form of nerve damage that starts in the fingers and the toes and can lead to symptoms such as numbness, tingling, pins and needles, inability to feel small objects. So it can have a real impact on the lives of the people who experience it. And we're looking at this condition, sort of investigating it from a variety of perspectives. So we're trying to improve assessment as well as looking for ways to sort of prevent or treat the condition. And so in our research, I guess, not only does the outcome, affect consumers, but a lot of the studies that we do have consumers as participants. So, for example, they, in several of our studies, they come in to have nerve testing done in order for us to look at both the impact and risk factors associated with this condition. And so from that perspective, I think, it has been really useful to have our consumers on board to, give their perspective on the things that are relevant to them. Sue has been involved in the program since before I even came on board. So I might get Sue to talk a little bit about how she started and became involved as a consumer, and then maybe I'll switch back and talk a bit about some of the ways in which she's involved in our group today.
I became involved in the CIPN. It's a lot easier if I just say CIPN project back in about 2014. As a member of the TCRN CAP, Susanna Park, who was one of the original researchers in the program, came and gave a little spiel at one of our TCRN workshops and asked for consumer participation. Now, I'm a lung cancer survivor and actually haven't ever had chemotherapy, but I'm also a 40-year diabetic and do have diabetic peripheral neuropathy. And I sort of thought, well, okay, I sort of know what it feels like. It's an interesting project. I'd like to be involved. And right from the start, Susanna made sure that, because this project is not, let's say, 6 little researchers in a lab. This is like they send an email out to 60 people, and quite often 50 of those will all meet at the meetings we have, which are probably 3 times,
Usually twice a year.
Usually twice a year, and there's quite often other little meetings connected with certain parts of the project. So it's got a lot of different areas of research in it. I found it fascinating and have been involved in ways such as there was an application form that participants in a trial were going to have to read and fill in and everything else like that. So I had the wonderful job of reading through the application form, making sure that it was clear and easily understood by somebody just like me. Unfortunately, I don't have the scientific background of Jeff, and will never look in a test tube, and I might look through a microscope, but that'll be about it. But I was able to sort of look and go from a patient's point of view and be able to give feedback and sort of say, well, that's good, and you just pick up little things in the writing. Sometimes it can be, a spelling mistake or an extra word or something. It doesn't matter. Everything is even as basic as that, especially on a grant application, is important to be picked up. They're noticed, and I do know that the Cancer Council's grant review people, they'll pick up on any little thing that you have in a grant application. If there's 2 words in a row and they're not picked up by spell check or something like that, the consumers will notice it and then go, oh, geez, they should have had it proofread. That's the type of, sometimes it's very basic feedback. Sometimes it's from the point of view, I got to look at the forms that people with peripheral neuropathy fill in to describe the different feelings that they have when peripheral neuropathy develops, whether there's pain, the things that they can do and they can't do. And because of my experience, I actually was able to look through those and go, no, these are really very good. I think about the only thing was I said, don't just put the acronym up the top. Put it in that's a lot easier, because sadly, usually people that come into the medical system from a patient's point of view get faced with so many acronyms and so many areas that they have no idea about. At least if you have a full name instead of an acronym. It sounds silly, but it works. I suppose it's that type of feedback that I can give. Sadly, not highly scientific, but I can definitely give the point of view of somebody that's quite often in a very difficult, and actually with the peripheral neuropathy, I'm a member of a lung cancer support group, and there's a number of people in the group that have had some of the chemotherapy and platinum-based drugs that have developed peripheral neuropathy, and it enables me to be able to talk to them about what's going on in this project. It's actually been fantastic. Thank you.
So just to give a couple of other examples of how Sue's been involved, we'll often involve our consumer advisors during the planning stages of setting up a new study. So a more recent example was that we were planning a drug trial to look at a potential drug treatment for CIPN. And so Sue and I met for about an hour, had a cup of coffee, and kind of talked through, the protocol together. So talked through the plan of what was to be done, looked through some of the forms together, just to get Sue's feedback on what we were doing. And for me, that was a really valuable experience, because I guess she's able to give me a lot of, tips on how to make things more understandable to, to people who aren't, studying this from a research perspective. So ideas about how to structure the consent form in a way that will be easy to understand for participants, as well as practical ideas about, so say for example in this study, participants need to complete a diary each day. So tips about, you know, how they might be able to, advice we could give to help them to remember how to do these kind of things. So she definitely had a lot of really practical ideas about how we could make the study run smoothly and have it be easy to understand. In addition to that, she's been involved in another study where basically we were looking at existing assessments for this condition. And so the assessments were being rated by various clinicians, researchers and nurses in terms of sort of how usable and reliable these assessment tools are. So we also got Sue and our other consumer advisor to rate these tools as well in order to give their perspective, because a lot of the assessment tools are questionnaires. So it's always good to have the person who would be completing the questionnaire give their feedback on, you know, how easy it is to understand, how relevant are the questions. So those are a couple of examples. I guess, as Sue said, a little bit less hands-on than in the situation of Jeff and Francis, but still really valuable to our project. And I'll just wind up by saying that it's been a real pleasure for me to work with both of our consumer advisors, because as much as I try to, you know, be able to see things from another person's perspective, you know, you can never achieve that 100%. And I just feel really privileged that they've been happy to share about their experiences and their perspectives. So thank you.